Hi friends, this is Nancy Gleason and welcome to my Stamping Space. Today I am going to share a video with you showing you how to get a good, clean, crisp impression every time you rubber stamp, because getting a nice clean impression is really crucial to a successful project. And I am going to share with you some tips and tricks on just how to ink your stamp and how to put your stamp to paper to get the best possible image every single time. I'm also going to share with you some things that you should not do and some things to avoid. Over my years of teaching, I have seen many people make some common mistakes, and I want to share those mistakes with you today so that you can learn how to avoid them so that you can get the best possible impression every time you rubber stamp. So come on, let's head over to my stamping space and we'll take a look on what we should do and what we should not do. Okay, stampers, so one of the most critical aspects of getting a good impression when you are stamping is to actually know your stamps and know your ink pads. The different types of stamps that are available from Stampin' Up, we have the red rubber and we have the photopolymer, which is completely clear, and they do both stamp a little bit different, so you want to play with both of those and kind of get a feel for how they work. You also want to know your stamp pads. The older stamp pads from Stampin' Up are the canvas or the linen type of stamp pad, where the newer ones are the firm foam. And even though they're called firm foam, the foam is very squishy, and it's very possible to have your stamp all the way into the ink and ink bubble up and ooze all over it. So we don't want that to happen. So with the older style pads, sometimes you'll hear people kind of bang on their stamp. They might even wiggle it a little bit and move it around the stamp pad. But before you ever put that to paper, turn it over and inspect your stamp. Is there good ink coverage? Is my raised portion of the stamp, which is the part that makes the impression, completely covered with ink? Do I have any stray ink along the edges that I don't want? If I do, you'll need to clean that off or clean the stamp off completely and start again. But if I see I have a nice good coverage of ink, I can go ahead and I can put that to paper. Now here is where you want to apply some pressure, and you also want to keep your stamp on the paper for a little bit. You want time for that ink to penetrate into the paper and get a good clean impression. And when I'm done, I should have a nice solid impression. What I don't want to do is just touch down, touch down. You can see the difference. When you're inking, you want to get good ink coverage, and if that means moving your stamp a couple times, you want to look at it and inspect it, and you don't just want to touch down, but you want to hold it down and give time for a solid impression. With the sentiment, if you push your stamp into the ink pad too hard, you will get ink bubbled up in between the letters. So I'm going to just lightly touch down onto my ink pad, and again I'm going to inspect. I'm going to look for good ink coverage. I'm going to make sure that there's no ink where ink shouldn't be, and then I will go ahead and I will stamp. And I will hold the stamp onto the paper to give it time for the ink to saturate into the paper and really give a nice dark impression. And if you follow those simple rules, you should get a good result every time. Now with the photopolymer stamps, I think having a piercing mat underneath is critical. It just gives a better surface to stamp on, and you'll get a better impression every time. Now with the new firm foam pads, they are very squishy. Kind of think of like a sponge or a pillow top mattress, how you can push your hand down in it, and when you push your hand down in it, the firm kind of comes up and like wraps around your hand. That's what's going to happen to your stamp on the ink pad if you aren't careful. And with the new pads, lightly kiss the surface. There's no stomping and banging. It's just a light touch. And I always keep my pinky in the air because that kind of gives you a lighter touch. And then I'm going to look. Now sometimes, because the ink pad is so wet and juicy, you kind of get some bubbling on the photopolymer, and that's okay. I can see through it, or I can see on this side and know that I have good ink coverage and I don't have any stray ink where I don't want it. So now I'm going to put this down on paper. Again, this is where I want to apply pressure to my stamp when it's on the paper, not when it's on the ink pad, and then I'm going to get a nice clean impression. And I'm going to do the same thing with my next stamp. I'm going to keep my pinky in the air so I know I just want a nice light touch, and you can see right through the stamp that I've got good ink coverage. I can turn it over, I can look. I don't have ink where I don't want it, and because this is photopolymer, I can line this up just perfectly, but I'm going to keep that stamp on the paper for a little bit to get a nice good impression. So that's what your stamping should look like. What you don't want to do, and this is going to pain me to do this, but I see this as a common mistake that people make all the time. They take their stamp when they put it on the ink pad and they press down really hard. Oh, look at that. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. What's going to happen now when I put this on paper? Ooh, ooh, not good at all. I don't have a nice clean impression. I've got all these stray ink marks where I don't want them. I don't have a nice solid mark. That is something you do not want to do. That is the most common mistake that I see people make when they are stamping. And I immediately need to get this off my stamp and even clean my block. So, light touch. Almost just set the stamp on the ink pad and let go. And you can see you've got ink on there already. So just a light touch. Please don't press down. No pressure. I can even say I've got a little bit of a stray ink mark there. So I can just pull that off. And now when I go to put my stamp to my paper, this is where I'm going to put pressure. This is where I'm going to hold it in place for a couple of seconds. And I've got a much better impression. And you can just see that that just works so much better. So let's try this now onto the firm foam. We have photopolymer on the firm foam. I'm still not pushing the stamp into the ink pad, but I am moving it around a little bit. These old style ink pads tend to kind of, like an old mattress, cave in the middle. So sometimes you'll want to move it around, but you don't want to press it down deep into the ink. And there, a much nicer impression. Now, I should have cleaned this sooner. Let's try our red rubber stamp, the sentiment. You can see lots of nooks and crannies where ink can really ooze in there if we're not careful. We're going to do this on the firm foam pad, on the newer pad. They're soft, they're squishy, light touch, barely just kiss the surface. And I can see when my stamp fell over, I got a line. That's not going to give me a good impression. So I'm taking this back to my Stampin' Scrub. I'm scrubbing it off. I'm going to dry it up, and I'm going to start again. So I've got a nice clean stamp, and now I'm just very lightly kissing the surface of the stamp onto the ink. And you can see I've got good ink coverage. I don't have any stray ink. Now I'll give it some pressure. I'll hold it there, let that ink saturate into the paper, and there we go. A nice, crisp, clean stamp. And what I'm not doing is pressing my stamp all the way into my ink like that, what most people want to do, and then they get ink everywhere, which just makes for a bad impression. So there you go, stampers, what to do and what not to do. So I hope that this video has helped you to be a better stamper, that you'll get a good impression every time. So the takeaway is know your stamp pad, the older style or the newer style, completely different, and you just need to kiss the surface of the stamp to the pad. And you don't want this, you want to look at the stamp, turn it over and look at the stamp after you ink it every time. If you have this going on, clean it off and start again. Inking your stamp is key to a good impression. So if you ink it right, you will get a good impression every time. So I hope that you like that, stampers. If you do, please leave me a comment, like my YouTube channel, and like me on Facebook, and follow my blog at www.mystampinSpace.com. This is Nancy Gleason, and I'll see you soon.